It was a day unlike any other, where the skies above the earth painted themselves with colors never seen before, and the air hummed with a melody only the universe could compose, as if something extraordinary were about to occur. And indeed it was, for on this very day, a woman unlike any other woman one would ever meet, stepped onto the soil of this planet. She moved with a grace that seemed unnatural, as if gravity itself bowed in her presence, and yet her demeanor radiated a warmth and gentleness that softened the edges of the unknown. She was alien in every conceivable way, and yet her smile, her gaze, her being, felt familiar to those who saw her, though none could explain why. The town where she arrived was small and tucked away in a quiet valley, with a river that sparkled like diamonds under the sun and fields that stretched endlessly in every direction. It was a place where time moved slowly, and life was simple, where the days were filled with the hum of insects, the calls of birds, and the occasional distant laughter of children. It was in this setting that the woman appeared, without warning, without ceremony, and with no explanation. She stood in the town square as people gathered around, drawn to her as though they were planets orbiting a sun, and she bypassed language and resonated directly in the hearts of those who listened. She invited them all to dinner, though not in the way humans might invite one another to a meal. The invitation was not spoken aloud, nor written on any tangible paper. It was a feeling, an understanding, shared thought that settled into the minds of those who stood around her, and though no one could say exactly how they knew, they all understood that tonight they were to gather for a meal unlike any other. Some questioned it at first, wondering if it were some strange dream or trick of the mind. But the longer they stood in her presence, the more their doubts melted away like frost beneath the morning sun. And so, as the day stretched lazily toward its close, the townsfolk began to prepare for this unusual event. The setting for the meal was a meadow just beyond the town, where the grasses grew tall and swayed gently under the light breeze. It was a place that looked ordinary to most, but on this night, under the deepening hues of twilight, it transformed into something magical. The sky above seemed closer than it ever had before, as though one could reach out and touch the stars that had begun to appear shimmering and watchful. And the air itself was different. It carried a scent that could not be named, something sweet and savory, something that spoke of lands far beyond the reach of human knowledge. Tables appeared as if conjured by some unseen force, long and wooden, their surfaces smooth and polished. They stretched across the meadow in a manner that seemed endless, and atop them were plates made of something that gleamed like moonlight, but felt soft to the touch. The chairs were woven from the grasses themselves, yet they held the weight of those who sat upon them, as though they had always been there. And it was here that the people of the town gathered. Some arrived hesitantly, others eagerly, but all felt the same inexplicable pull to be present, to see what would happen, to experience whatever the alien woman had planned. She arrived at last, as the first star fully claimed its place in the sky, and she moved through the crowd with the calm presence that seemed to settle any lingering nerves. She did not speak, but she did not need to. Her eyes met the eyes of each person there, and in that silent exchange, they felt welcomed, seen, understood, and she gestured for them to sit, and so they did. The tables now full of people who just hours before had been strangers, but in this moment, felt connected by something far greater than themselves. Food began to appear, though no one could say from where it came. Dishes materialized before them, each one more curious and wondrous than the last. There were bowls filled with colors that had no names, plates of fruits that glowed softly as though lit from within, and trays of meats that sizzled and steamed, releasing aromas that awakened memories of places no one had ever been, yet longed to return to. There was bread that melted on the tongue, leaving behind the taste of spring mornings, and pies whose crust cracked like the surface of frozen lakes, revealing fillings that sparkled like gemstones. Each dish was unlike anything any human had ever seen, and yet, The moment it touched their lips, it felt like coming home. The alien woman sat at the head of the table, though her presence felt less like that of a host and more like that of a quiet guardian. She ate alongside them, partaking in the meal she had provided, and though she never spoke, those at the table felt her joy, her satisfaction, her quiet contentment in sharing this feast with them. There was no need for conversation among the people, for words seemed unnecessary in the presence of such beauty. They shared smiles, exchanged glances, and felt a kinship that transcended language. And as they ate, they began to notice something else, something subtle but undeniable. The food they consumed did more than satisfy their hunger. It stirred something within them, something deep and ancient that had long been buried beneath the weight of ordinary lives. As they tasted each dish, they remembered moments they had forgotten, dreams they had abandoned, and loves they had lost. They saw visions of themselves as children, running barefoot through fields, their laughter carried by the wind. They remembered nights spent beneath star-filled skies, whispering their hopes to the vastness above. They recalled the way it felt to hold another hand, to dance without music, to dream without fear, and with each bite, they felt lighter, freer, more alive than they ever had before. The meal continued long into the night, as the stars multiplied and the air grew cool, but no one seemed to mind. Time had ceased to hold meaning here in this meadow, beneath the gaze of the alien woman. They were not bound by clocks or schedules or the demands of the world beyond. They were simply present, living in a moment that stretched endlessly, and yet felt fleeting at the same time. And as the final dish disappeared from the tables, leaving behind only the faintest traces of sweetness on their tongues, the people sat back in their chairs, their hearts full, their spirits lifted, their bodies tingling with a sense of wonder they could not name. The alien woman stood then, her movement as fluid and natural as the flowing of a river. She looked out over the people, her people now, for in some strange and unspoken way, they had become hers. And she raised her hand once more, a gesture of farewell and gratitude, and as she did so, the tables and chairs began to vanish one by one, dissolving into the night air like mist, until there was nothing left but the meadow and the stars and the people, who now sat on the grass, feeling as though they had awoken from the most beautiful dream. The alien woman turned and began to walk away, her figure becoming smaller and smaller as she moved toward the horizon, and though no one wanted her to leave, they knew they could not stop her, for she did not belong to this place or this world. She was something beyond their understanding, a traveler, guide, a bringer of gifts they could never repay. And as she disappeared into the darkness, the people remained seated for a long while, staring at the place where she had been, their hearts aching with a longing they could not describe. When at last the townsfolk returned to their homes, they did so in silence, each one carrying with them the memory of the meal they had shared, and the woman who had brought them together. They did not speak of what had happened that night, for it felt sacred, something to be treasured and held close rather than shared with careless words. And yet the effects of the meal lingered in the days that followed. People found themselves kinder to one another, more patient, more understanding. Arguments that once seemed important now felt trivial, and burdens that had weighed heavy on their shoulders seemed to lift as though carried away by an unseen hand. The meadow where the feast had been held returned to its ordinary state, with no sign of the tables or the food, or the woman who had brought them there. But the people knew they would never forget what had happened on that night. They would carry it with them always, a quiet sweetness that lingered in their hearts like the taste of honey on their lips. And though the alien woman never returned, they would often look to the sky on clear nights and wonder if she was out there somewhere, sharing her gift with others, just as she had shared it with them. And so, the town carried on as it always had, but with a difference so subtle it could not be seen. Only felt the people were happier, the days were brighter, and the simple act of sharing a meal became something sacred, something to be cherished something that connected them to one another and to the memory of the woman who had taught them that even the strangest invitations can lead to the sweetest of turns.